This episode of the Event Industry News podcast is sponsored by Evolution Dome, award-winning temporary inflatable event structures. Take a look at their structures at evolutiondome.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. And it's a double guest episode today, which always excites me because it means I can do less talking and just let our guests talk about what they know best. We're talking all things IMEX and anyone in the events industry, which is pretty much everyone I know. If you're at IMEX this year, would have seen some significant differences, some changes in the rebrand. And I'm delighted to say that we've got two people who are very much sort of behind that process, going to be talking today about how that all unfolded and some of the decisions and the processes that went along with that particular rebrand. From IMEX, I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast design manager Anna Gyseman and somebody who's responsible for the interaction design at IMEX, Ollie Bailey, both joining the podcast for the first time. Ollie, Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
You're very welcome. We were talking there about the fact that I'm bereft of artwork behind at the level that my two guests have got today, but I do have a dog. Mabel, who regular podcast listeners will know, joins me on most of the podcast recordings, is in the room today. So rebrands. I've got some wonderful documents here that I'm holding up to the screen, which are the sort of the documents and the sort of the processes that that were put together as part of this rebrand, Anna. And fascinating to actually look at a document and actually see and understand what some of those thought processes and what happened behind it. Let's start by sort of asking the obvious question and saying, rebranding such a globally recognized and established event is a huge decision. When was this process instigated, and when did the conversations first start to take place about whether or not you needed and should go ahead with the rebrand?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm quite new to IMEX. I've been with them for 2.5 years. It was about 18 months ago it came up in conversation, and it just felt like the logo didn't represent who we were anymore as a company. And I dreamt of rebranding it and just thought it'd be wonderful. Not rebranding, refreshing. So we wanted to not alienate the existing audience. That was very important to us, but it just needed a modernising and streamlining, really. That was the thought process behind it. And very lucky that Ray, the chairman, and Karina, the CEO, were very much behind the idea and kind of gave us free rein to just see what we came up with. So it was a fantastic process, and it's been a long 18 months, but it's been worthwhile.
And I suppose once you're given the green light to go ahead with something like that, as a design person, that must be great for you to be able to sort of sit with a blank canvas in some respects and get the creative juices flowing.
Yeah, frightening in a way. But we did have an existing logo, so it was very important that we found out what people liked about the logo and what people liked less about it. So we did a lot of research, and we went out to 50 external partners and just said, tell us what you like. We're not trying to trip you up here, just, be completely honest. And it was fascinating what we found out. So we knew it wasn't a totally blank canvas, which would have been terrifying. And I have launched brands before that, it was exactly that. And that is in some ways harder. So we knew what we had to play with, and we knew that there was a lot of love around the IMEX dots, which people love. So we launched from that spot, really, and went across the company, and Ollie and his team were fantastic in input. And so that was us in the back room in Hove.
And coming to you, Ollie, if I'm right in saying so, your responsibility lies with how that brand then manifests itself on the actual show floor, so to speak. So all of those assets that we see making up, the production of a show floor at an event like IMEX and in the conference areas, the trade show floor, etc. How important was it that you had a sort of a collaborative input into what was happening, given how you like, to represent and manifest the logos on things like screens, on printed material, etc.
Well, it's huge, and it's not just me, although I'm here talking about that today, of course. One thing that we've done, which would be a great takeaway for anybody listening to this, is set up a cross-team group of people whose sole function really is to look at the experiential side of our events. And they're from all the different departments that we have, all come together and then are able to consider everything from every angle like that. So after COVID, we had to look at arrivals in a very meaningful way. We needed to avoid any kind of crowds and things like that. And that information and that work that we did then really helped with this, because then we knew, and we actually went to Frankfurt, didn't we, Anna, and walked the paths that everybody would have, which is very important. I mean, empathy is obviously the designer's main goal there.
Sure.
We knew these points of arrival, so when we wanted to do a big reveal, which was one of the things we wanted to do, we had all of that information from previous years, all of that work. This same group of people, of which Anna is part as well, that we were able to draw on and really make use of.
And there are so many assets involved now in live event production when it comes to branding, and I've got, I would say, more than some experience of this. I work on the production team for Event Tech Live, and I'm very much sort of show floor operations, Ollie. So maybe not from a design point of view, but certainly I'm aware of just how many different assets are there. And I'm constantly being asked, can I get a logo on that screen? Or we've got a portrait, point of sale unit over there. Can we brand that up with some digital signage? And so having different logo options and branding options available so that they look right in all of these different formats is so important now, Anna, isn't it? When you think about people looking at it on mobile screens in portrait or landscape mode, when we have all the different assets that are available to us, and that sort of customer journey, I suppose, is critical, that you maintain some form of consistency, but also give yourself the flexibility to adapt to these different delivery methods.
No, absolutely. It was a huge undertaking, infinite possibilities of where it might turn up, and we had to. I think the process, we wanted to really streamline the logo. The previous one had, it kind of disappeared a bit when it was amongst other logos, and it was quite intricate, if you like. So we wanted to have quite a confident, plain almost, very modern logo. And as soon as we hit the handshaking logo, I don't know if everyone's familiar with it, my first instinct was, I love that, but we've got to try and trip it up. We've got to try and make it not work. So we put it really small, mono, amongst a million other logos. You put it white out on a colour background. You put it full colour on an 8-metre board. And if it kept performing, which it did, we thought this could well be the winning formula. So we certainly considered absolutely everything from letterheads to billboards. And no stone was left unturned. We really did our thorough diligence with it. So I'm really thrilled that it seems to be performing so well.
That's interesting there when we talk about, the process of rebranding an established event, is that I've worked as a freelancer with other events before where they've sent me their assets, say, oh yeah, here's our logos, and you go to put it in certain assets, Ollie, and it just doesn't work. They do a PowerPoint template, for example, for their speakers, and they put the logo on, and it just doesn't pop out on there because they've not thought about how it would sit on that particular asset. And taking your time with a process like this is critical, isn't it? It's one thing coming up with a great logo design in the first instance, and that will work, but you really have to sort of allow yourself that time to cover all the bases, don't you?
We do. And it's amazing how many such assets you can accrue over 20 plus years. We were still finding them, halfway through the process. What about that one? One thing we did that was very valuable, putting it back again in the context of the event itself, was have some prototypes made, go over to Frankfurt and look at them in situ and try them out. And we did actually make some changes on the back of that. That was very useful indeed. Yeah, we also got a great deal of confidence on the back of that as well, that this works. It works in the context of Messe Frankfurt in this instance. So
yeah. Do you remember what some of those changes were?
Yeah, we were looking at directional signage, because we wanted it to be obviously recognizable as IMEX, but it shouldn't be it wanted to complement the venue's own signage as well, which is great. I love Messe Frankfurt's signage anyway. We chose the scheme, a different color scheme. We went for the sort of navy background color for the directional signage, which contrasts, which IMEX specific directional signage rather, which contrasts against the red of Messe Frankfurt, the overview. This is Hall 8, this is Hall 9. Anything more granular than that, we had a different color scheme to that. And we just made some changes to the typography, was it, or some of the arrows, I think, once we were seeing it in situ.
Yeah, that was very important. So we went and made the signs up, and I just think it's very important to actually see it. You can't, there's only so much you can get from the printer at work. So, and then you just stood 6 feet away or wherever someone would be reading these signs and think that's 150 point, can you read it? And then you would know, and we just knew immediately it needed to come up a bit. I think we thickened the line of the arrow a bit, and we knew it would be very visually noisy on site. So the navy was a sign in itself that said this is a bit of IMEX directional signage for you, and it worked really well.
And the signs themselves we were using as part of the whole brand refresh anyway, because each one of them, sure, it's functional, but it should also be decorative on that side as well, and part of getting the brand message across. It can be multifunctional on that sense.
What level of attention was paid, Anna, to animated versions of the logo? Because when we talk about digital assets, social media, content, etc., I would guess that that's probably quite a key element now to have an animated version of it.
Yeah, so we work closely with an animation studio in Brighton, a place called Buff Motion, and we have a hero version, a sustainability version, an innovation version, and a Sonic logo. So, and we just had the best fun. I mean, it was such a unifying effect. I mean, Ollie's brilliant at music and has had stuff on radio. So, I mean, just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So we had so much fun bringing those to life. I have them. I don't know how I can share them with this this screen. It's slightly different to my normal screen, but
no, absolutely. Well, let's talk it through it. And for any tech users and event tech people out there, we use StreamYard to record the Event Industry News podcast. And hopefully on your screen somewhere, Anna, you may have a present button. I think it's present or screen share.
Here we go. Present. Yes, share screen. I can do that now. If anyone would like to see these animated logos,
let's give it a go, everybody. This will be the first time ever on the podcast that we've used the present.
Let's just hope you don't see my gas bill or something. Let's hope.
Here we go, everybody. See, we're opening up new corridors of conversation here for event people as well. Who use platforms like this. And interestingly, just as a side, I've never sat on the other end of StreamYard as the guest. I've only ever been the one sort of in the pilot seat, for example. So
I hope people can see this. Can anyone see this?
Well, we can't at the moment, but I'll tell you what we're going to do on Event Industry News. When the podcast goes up onto Event Industry News, everybody, you may be listening to the audio version of this wherever you get your podcast from. If you go to eventindustrynews.com and you go to the podcast page, you see the video version of this podcast, but underneath it, there is always a little bit of a podcast synopsis about what we're talking. And some of these assets that we're going to be discussing today will put underneath the actual podcast episode on eventindustrynews.com, so people can actually see it, and a link to some other stuff, because as I said, the documents that I was sent in advance are really interesting if, for anybody out there, regardless of the size of event that you're running. It's such a critical component now to get all of these different elements correct. Maybe we could talk about some of the actual attendee feedback, because I've no doubt that the collaborative process within your own organization was significant, but it's one thing internally being happy with what you're doing, but there must have been a sort of a collaboration with attendees, with audience people, with audiences, with sponsors, etc. What was that process like?
Well, we have very key strategic partners that we work with. As you can imagine, the German Convention Bureau, Frankfurt Convention Bureau as well. Got definitely an early viewing of those, and we were asked to give feedback on that side of things, which was very positive, and that again gave us a lot of confidence and knew we were moving in the right direction. Of course, we also had to make sure that when we did change over to the new branding, that there weren't too many of the old ones flying around as well. So it was really useful to get those key partners on board, because they generate a lot of media as well. So they had to know that there was a time when they had to switch and do all of that. As Anna said, sharing it around the team was really useful as well.
Yeah, that's vital.
Yeah, and I suppose that for things like sponsors, there's sponsorship and branding and sort of co-branding with headline sponsors and stakeholders and partners in an event like this is absolutely critical. It forms a key income stream for events like this, and no doubt I guess that those sponsors and partners that you've probably worked with for a number of years have all got to be on the same page and not necessarily happy with it in terms of giving you an approval from it, but you certainly don't want to potentially alienate some of their brand or interfere with some of their branding and how they're putting stuff together, do you, Ollie?
No, absolutely not. So yeah, I'm not necessarily asking for their buy-in, but it had to also work with everything that they did as well. So we have to, we looked at our key partners, we looked at the branding side by side in each one of those instances as well to make sure it still worked. And when we launched IMEX in Frankfurt, it was very much IMEX in partnership with the GCB. Of course, we are still in partnership with the GCB, but the logos are a little bit more distinct these days. But nevertheless, they appear side by side in so many different applications that was something we absolutely had to take into consideration.
When it came to launching and actually sort of revealing the rebrand, again, that's not something that I suppose you could do. You could just say, yeah, we're ready to go, whack it out on social media and change our logos on the website. But, it was clearly a much more thought out process than that. Again, collaboration with the marketing teams, with the public relations teams, I'm guessing. And how long did it take to actually put the strategy together to actually launch and reveal the new branding, Anna?
That was 18 months. And so the art department, we actually sit within marketing. So it was brilliant. So we felt very collaborative with them. And head of marketing operations, someone called Lottie Elson, set up a brand refresh channel. And we met every week for 18 months and just chatted through, they were kind of our scaffold, if you like, and we were allowed to do the creative stuff. It was actually Lottie's idea way back in the beginning to do the rebrand. She was the one who put the germ of the idea in our heads. So we felt very supported, and it was a super process, and they were absolutely key to it, and with the words and the strategy behind it. But we were very, very thorough and felt very supported by the entire team, which was fabulous.
Does it boil down to, though, a specific sort of minute, stroke of the hour when everyone hits a button and everything changes?
That's a good question. We were thinking, when do we launch? And then we thought, well, if we launched at the show, it would be incredibly hard work. Because obviously we had the stuff going out before the show was in what we call the heritage branding. And as we approached the show, I was very keen it didn't jump from one to the other in a heartbeat. So we were doing something called interim branding. So I started kind of streaming in an IMEX logo that was very generic and very plain in a sans serif font, which no one really noticed except for us, obviously. So it wasn't a massive leap of faith when it suddenly appeared. We were starting to introduce the palette, and just very subtly, because we knew what was coming, but no one else did. And then we knew that launching at Frankfurt was such a gift. It was going to be out there. It was going to make a huge impact. It's terrifying, of course. But I knew we had designed something really terrific. And it was exciting, terrifying, as those moments are when you walk into the sea and you can barely touch the bottom anymore. That's when they say humans are at their finest. And it certainly felt like that the night before the show. I don't know if Ollie agrees, but it was a gift to be able to launch because there it was. It was everyone was taking photos of it, and it kind of did its work for us. So
similarly with sorry, Anna. Similarly with our digital spaces, because obviously we have the physical show that's on for 3 days and everybody knows about, but there's a lot of planning online for everybody in the appointment system before all of that. So we were able to, as Anna said, sort of ease it in by changing the color palette and things like that we were using, and then only change the actual logo branding towards the end. So Don't think anybody really would have noticed that there was a transition in progress there, but there certainly was. I mean, it helps that we were using a new system anyway, I suppose, so everything was brand new. But it was quite well choreographed, the change from one to the other.
And did people, what was the sort of the feedback like pre-show? Did you get comments from people who were starting to notice it, or were aware that a change was afoot? Were you hoping that you would try and keep most of it to an instinctive reaction of people walking, into the venue and suddenly going, wow, this is great? Or were you hoping for sort of a strike a balance between that and some early feedback from people?
I think one of our success criteria was to create that feedback moment. And one of the things we wanted to do, that impact moment, when you're walking in and seeing that, although we did sort of try and preload it a little bit. We had quite a lot of branding at the airport this year that we worked with our partners at Frankfurt Convention Bureau, who organised that with us. So there was quite a lot of subtle building before you actually got to that point. But we did decide to focus on that big reveal when you first walk in. We had some huge aluminium powder coated letters made, monolithic size really, I suppose, of the logo. And what we wanted to do was create an image that was, if you wanted to photograph IMEX, to say either I'm at IMEX or IMEX has got some new branding, we provide them with the perfect shot, so they don't have to do that anywhere else. That was one of our great success criteria there. And it's easier to measure that because you can observe people there photographing themselves in and amongst it. We also use, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of a company called Zenus, who are a facial analysis company. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I work with Panos and the team at Zenus for Event Tech Live. So we worked. Of course, with them, you do. Last year in London and this year in Las Vegas doing their facial recognition stuff. It's fantastic AI. It is. Little plug for those guys. Go and check out Zenus.
And we had one of their cameras set up at that point of reveal. So we could tell it's anything that's designed to produce a positive reaction, positive sentiment. That's where things like this comes in. So we were able to say whether that point of reveal, whether the positive sentiment was higher, lower, whatever, to the overall baseline of the show. So we have a success criteria of that's what it's supposed to do. Is it working?
And I should give a little bit of context there for maybe anybody listening to the podcast who's not aware of Zenus and what it does. It's facial recognition, but in a sense that it's completely anonymous. It's not recording people's faces. What it's doing is tracking and monitoring the reaction of somebody's face. We use it at Event Tech Live in the conference theatres, so we can actually look to see what people's reactions were like during conference sessions to see which ones generated the most sort of positive reaction in terms of facial analysis, which ones maybe people switched off a little bit off. We can even see sort of down to the minute, during that particular element of somebody's conference session, we can see when somebody's maybe attention span dipped a little bit because of their facial reaction. So in this context, the sort of the facial reactions we use specifically to monitor people's reaction to the logo.
That's right, James. And I think the key differential there is it's facial analysis, not facial recognition. There's no link back to the actual, person's personal information, not even their name or anything like that. So all it really is doing is corroborating our own observations that we're making on site ourselves anyway. I was looking at it thinking it looks to be working. People seem to be enjoying it. But then there's a just dispassionate AI that can also just verify or falsify that as well, or at least, add some support to the hypothesis.
And what wonderful sort of, world that we live in now in the event space that we have that sort of easily deployable technology available to us that's discreet, that can give us almost instant feedback on what people were doing. And I guess it's, of course, it no doubt was overwhelmingly positive. We wouldn't be doing this podcast, so I guess now talking about a rebrand, unless that the feedback, Anna, had been sort of overwhelmingly positive from people.
Yeah, absolutely. You could definitely feel almost instantly there was a kind of, I can't describe it, there was a fizz, and I've had that once before when I launched a magazine called Grazia. You suddenly realise there was something happening and everyone was reading it, everyone was on the bus, everyone was on the tube holding it, and you thought, this is working. And it was a similar feeling. You could tell the joy it was bringing, and it was quite palpable. It was interesting, and it was live in front of our eyes. So yes, terrifying, but it worked. So all good.
And in terms of what events are there to do, and how they engage with the attendees that are visiting them, something that's really important is that a live event such as IMEX is seen to evolve, particularly given the marketplace that it's serving. It's serving people who themselves are delivering events, who are constantly seeking to evolve. And I guess such a significant change like this, as an underlying PR message to your audience, is that we're not just sitting on our laurels. We're not complacent that this has been a successful event for many, many years. We're also happy to make significant changes, which instantly to your attendees as they walk through the door will show, wow, this is the same but different. They're moving forward. There could be new stuff here this year. I'm guessing that there must have been a really positive impact then on all of the other aspects of the show floor, and all, something like this will have a big impact on the engagement with exhibitors, with conference sessions, and all of the other stuff that we look at analytically after the event, Ollie.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to sort of stop and take the time to develop the brand as a dedicated exercise, taking in all those other aspects of the the physicality of the show, the messaging around it, the human element that we all realize the importance of now, having spent a couple of years in the wilderness. I mean, that's really what amongst the team anyway, I think the tremendous support around doing this brand refresh was because we had a passion for the events industry reignited, I think, in many respects. People are very much at the core of this new brand image, with the handshake motif on the M. If you don't know what I'm talking about, have a look at the logo. And the animations that we mentioned earlier are very much about the people who attend. IMEX is an event for the meetings industry. It's not our event, so having those people there was that message there was wonderful. And so the new palette and the new branding just gave us a whole new set of tools to be able to get that sort of joy of events right in the middle of things where it should be again. So it was great to work with. It was a real labor of love.
Something that is really important that I asked today while I've got you both on the podcast is relates to the topic of sustainability, and there's a huge focus within the events industry at the moment on sustainability, sustainable practices, not just with our physical assets and the reuse of assets, but with our people, our sustainable practices when it comes to staff and retention and training and all of those aspects. But when you're dealing with a major rebrand and you're suddenly generating new physical assets to go on a show floor, how much of the focus is on sustainability and whether or not you can reuse and get sort of a longer lifespan out of some of the physical assets that you're generating to go into the venue?
It's first and foremost. Basically, if it's not sustainable, it doesn't get done. That's the rule really that we have. We have so many great ideas that we don't end up using because we can't, for the time being, think of a way to actually realize them. As I said before, we were working towards this for quite some time. In some aspects, we used the interim, more neutral branding for things that we had to build last year or the year before. We had no choice, but we wanted them to have that longevity. So we thought, we have to brand them, but let's not do the old branding. We not ready with the new stuff yet. We can just live with the interim stuff, because it's more important to do that than it is to throw that away and then go with the new branding. Similarly, with all the other directional signs, some of them are kind of evergreen. They're the same every year. So in that sense, we were able to just use the old ones until they got to the end of their life cycle. We choreographed that. But some change every year, inevitably. So we're trying to cut down on those. We're using technology a lot more for things like wayfinding to help with that sort of thing.
Yeah,
but absolutely, it's the number one priority for us.
Fabulous. And I suppose finally, as we sort of start to wrap up this episode, Anna, is there a life cycle for branding for any given event or any given brand, if for that matter? That this felt like it was a natural sort of conclusion of the old branding and an evolution into something new. I get the impression that there was just this underlying feeling within the organization that it was time for a refresh. Have you put a life cycle on this new stuff, or is it just a case of waiting till it feels like it's ready to be refreshed again in a few years' time?
I am very keen that this is not a full stop for the brand, it's a springboard. So we were very conscious to get it out and into people's DNAs as quickly as possible. So we were quite reserved in a way, just using the primary palette. So now as I feel it went, it did get into people's DNA quite quickly and it's worked. And if you now look at the old logo, you kind of think the new one is how it always should have been, which was always my dream. But now we can start really, really pushing it with on the design front. So I think it's difficult, and I think you need to see what you do have. I don't want to keep thinking you've got to change it. I really want to keep it consistent. I think the brand is really, really terrific, and it really represents who we are. But now we can really kind of raise the design bar with it. There's so many possibilities. So no, I wouldn't look to change or rebrand again for a considerable amount of time, but there is a lot of things we have going on in the back of our heads that we haven't put on the table yet. So watch this space. But I think it's got the legs to, have some real fun with it. So
fabulous. We're going to start wrapping up today's episode, but not without maybe pointing people in the right direction and just reminding you of what we said earlier, which is that we'll put some of these assets into the description on underneath the video on the eventindustrynews.com podcasts page. So if you're listening to this today, a reminder to head over to eventindustrynews.com, find this episode of the podcast under the podcast page and see some of those assets. I think we'll probably put some links in there as well, guys, to things like IMEX exhibitions, I think is the website. But if you just Google IMEX, it will be at the top of the results. So we can point people in that direction. And maybe important as well to maybe point people in the direction of some of the social media channels and take a look at all of those different platforms, because no doubt there'll be subtle differences and refinements from channel to channel where you can see, at first hand, some of the differences where you retain similarities, but have the subtle differences necessary to make all those different social media channels now, relevant and good for what, how people interact with those. So loads of stuff to research out there. I guess just Google IMEX and you'll find it, because I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast are, maybe not necessarily working for an event or for events of the scale and size and the global sort of recognition that comes with something like IMEX. But some of the takeaways that they can take out this episode today, I suppose, are fundamentals that can be carried down regardless of the size or scale of your organization and the size of event that you're running. Things like the interim logos as you're moving in something, if it's a long-term process. That to me is a really sort of significant takeaway from today, is that, if you know that you're going to do it over 2 years, 18 months, then from a sustainability point of view, that interim branding is something that I think that, straight away, a lot of people may not have considered before. Certainly I wouldn't have done, but gives you sort of a longer shelf life of some of those key assets that we have at events. So thank you both. We've been talking to Anna Gyseman and Ollie Bailey from IMEX about this rebrand. No doubt loads of the people that listen and follow this podcast were there in Frankfurt this year. If you weren't, and if you want to get over to the next editions of the event, urge you to do so. It's a fantastic event for anybody that's involved in the industry, and check out everything IMEX just by Googling it and looking at any one of their channels. What I should do is give a little mention as well, because we mentioned the word sustainability, to Event Sustainability Live. It's a new show that's going to be launched alongside and run alongside Event Tech Live at Excel London in November, 15th, 16th of November. So alongside Event Tech Live, there's going to be Event Sustainability Live, doing exactly what it says on the tin, a show specifically for event professionals, talking about sustainable practices and how we need to continue and how we can continue to develop those within the events industry, not just from a carbon footprint point of view, not just from a recycling physical elements point of view, but sustainable practices when it comes to our operations with our staff, the well-being of our staff, the long-term management of people who work within the industry, and making sure that everything that we do with people and physical elements are sustainable going forward. So yeah, check out Event Sustainability Live. Just Google that. It's on the 15th of 16th of November at Excel London. Which brings us nicely to the end of today's episode. Thanks once again to you both for joining us. Thanks for giving us, what is just a quick snippet and a sort of, a quick overview of what must have been and is certainly a huge, huge undertaking. Congratulations on the success of it, and hope to see you again on the podcast in the future. Which brings us nicely to the end of today's episode. Thanks to Ollie, thanks to Anna, and we'll see you next time. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers.